Okay, hi everyone, welcome. We are here tonight to hear from Kristen Willingham, who is currently a first-year medical student at UNC Chapel Hill, or UNC School of Medicine, which is sometimes just called UNC SOM. And our format is going to be Q&A and talk about her experience at UNC Asheville, and then going into the application process and choosing medical school and the experiences and the opportunities she's getting through UNC Chapel Hill. A little more introduction, that Kristen is a recent graduate from UNC Asheville from 2019. She graduated with a major, what her major was, a BA in psychology and a minor, I'm just trying to get the words out, a minor in neuroscience. And she did research. She did the MAHEC internship and it has a wealth of knowledge. She also helped to reinvigorate and really, restart this student group, the Aspiring Healthcare Professional Student Group. And so I will stop sharing and appreciate y'all's patience. I'm not the quickest navigator. And so, Kristen, I want to start by welcoming you and asking you first, kind of about your interests and how it started with wanting to go to undergrad, wanting to go into healthcare, and then specifically medicine. So what initially drew you to medicine, and how did you know that was the career that you wanted to pursue?
So first of all, you guys have talked me up way too much. I'm not that important, but the first thing that happened was I was about 16. I was offered through my high school the opportunity to go into a clinic. And some of you may be familiar, it's in Hendersonville, it's Blue Ridge Community Health Services. And at the time that I went there, it was the old building. It was not as big as it is now. And I kind of knew I wanted to do medicine because a lot of my family members had always been ill. And in Henderson County, you just didn't have the care that you needed. And so you had to drive to Spartanburg, or you had to drive to Asheville, or you just didn't get it at all because you couldn't take the time or you couldn't afford to go to a specialist. So I was just like, I want to be better. I want to come back here and be better than what we currently offer in Henderson County. And so I solidified that. I went into Blue Ridge Community Health Services and I fell in love with it. I was like, I would be happy doing this if no one paid me anything. And that kind of took me from there. I was fairly good in school and went to UNC Asheville. And I don't know, it was just part of the whole streamline. People are like, go to UNC Chapel Hill if you want to do pre-med, go to a bigger university. But UNCA helped me really kind of foster that. And they gave me so many opportunities to do so many different things that it just helped my kind of passion grow.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, and actually I forgot to answer your other question about why medicine. It's specifically, I can remember Dr. Crumpy. I walked into his office one day and I said, hey, I'm thinking about PA, maybe med school, maybe PA. And he said, what do you want to lead or you want to follow? He's like, you're underselling yourself. And I said, what do you mean? He's like, people who want to go PA are underselling themselves. He said, I have so many kids who come in here and talk to me and say, I just want to go PA. He's like, you are better than that. You can go into medical school. And I was like, you're right, Dr. Crumpy, I definitely can do that. So that was part of that process for me.
That's funny. Yeah, we have some people who are interested and kind of on the borderline, and yeah, but that is one way to put that. I want to soften that blow a little bit. Is one way.
Yeah, it was shocking to me when Dr. Crumpy said it, but I kept thinking about it. And really the way that I thought about it is, do I want to lead or do I want to kind of not be the leader of the team? Because it's super valid for someone to not say, I want the full responsibility of all of this. You can still practice in a huge breadth if you're a PA, but the doctor is the leader of the team, and that's kind of how it's seen. And I just realized that I wanted to be the leader.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So for your time at UNC Asheville, what would be your advice to get the most out of your experience here?
Use your resources. I mean, go talk to your professors, do what you want to do, because I cannot tell you how many people came to me and said, hey, you might be interested in this, or hey, you might want to do this. And it was so easy to find people who would work with me. You know, I did research with Dr. Nealon, and I think it's because he was my advisor and I needed one extra credit. He's like, well, I'm working on a project. You want to do it? I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And I remember I was hanging out in the Psych building one day. I don't know if the Psych building is back open, Carmichael, but all of a sudden I was walking through the halls and they were doing the high school program for, I don't know what they call it. What do you call the high school program when you bring those kids in?
Is it the Olympiad? Is that
No, it wasn't Olympiad. It was like this experience day.
Something. Oh, I don't know. I was thinking the after school thing.
Explore the tour, maybe?
Maybe it was Junior Bulldogs. I don't remember what it was. But I was walking through the halls.
That was it.
There you go. And Dr. Fu was like just portraying cockroaches. And he's like, Kristen, come do this for me. And I was like, okay. And so just things just fell in my lap because I was at this small school where everybody knew who I was. And they knew kind of what my dreams were. And I don't know, the best thing to do is just talk to your professors. Don't, go in and be like, I'm going to be the #1 doctor. I'm going to do all these things, but just say, I'm interested in medicine. I'm interested in going into PA. I'm interested in doing these things. And it's like the world opens up for you as soon as you start to make these connections.
Yes. Yeah. I just want to chime in, like, professors don't come to UNCA because this is a double negative, but because they don't want to talk to students. Like, they're here because they like students. They want to engage with them. Otherwise they wouldn't come here. It would not be appealing. Okay. So how did you gain clinical experience?
So it actually worked really well. The first thing I did was I applied for the MAHEC internship, and the first year I did not get it. So if you apply for it and don't get it, do not be discouraged. Amanda Green is also amazing. So the first time you get rejected, if you get rejected, email her and say, what can I do to improve? Because she's very good about that kind of thing. But then for my psychology degree, I had to kind of do an internship as kind of my senior capstone. And so I just reached back out to Amanda and I said, hey, can you hook me up with MAHEC somehow? And she said, absolutely, come talk to me. And so I worked for an entire semester by myself and got the credit for it at MAHEC. And then the next time I applied for the summer after I had, not after I had graduated. Oh yeah, actually I think after I had graduated. I never remember the timeline anymore. And I got accepted. And it's because Amanda got to know who I was. So always reach back out to her. And she's got so many programs going on. So I got both a full semester of MAHEC experience and a whole summer. And it was really easy to do because people are just there to work for you.
Great. And then could you talk about some other things that helped make your application stand out? And I want to make sure that people hear this, as you don't do things to make your application stand out, but what things did you engage in and grow and learn from that then were on your application that you think helped demonstrate, or help the admissions committee see you as a competitive and a applicant that they wanted to have at their school?
I think the first thing that I always recommend to people is have a narrative. You always need to have a narrative. You don't just need to go and check lists, like check a box and say, hey, I'm doing research in this. I'm going and volunteering here. I'm doing all these things. You need to have some kind of flow to it. So I did volunteering where I would go into the community and I would teach underserved kids. And I would go and I worked at MAHEC where that's underserved people. And I went and I worked as a rehabilitation technician. So I worked with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So my whole narrative was, I am here to serve my community and the people who need it the most. And that really stood out. People actually acknowledged that to me, like, you've got a very cohesive story here. And then the other thing is just to have something that's outside of the kind of standard. And what I mean by that is, on my application, I asked about hobbies. And I started to learn how to ride the unicycle. And so that was the thing I brought up. And I wanted to hike the AT before in my gap year. And COVID kind of ruined all of that stuff. But I wanted to do it. And so we talked about that in my application and in my interviews. And so it's not just about having the best application that's got all of these things on it that you think will impress them. Just be yourself and say, this is who I am, and this is what my passion is, and it will show.
Great.
Could I interject something here from
Yes.
my vantage point with Kristen? One bit of advice I would give everyone who goes through UNCA is to go by Kristen's example, and just when you're in a class, just throw yourself into the class, the material. Kristen was just relentless at wanting to understand every bit of the material. There was never some point where she kind of took her foot off the gas. And I think that gives us as faculty the kind of the picture of a student that allows us to really advocate for them. We write letters of recommendation for people and all. And with Kristen, I can recall, just how there was just this absolute, it was coming from a very deep place in her soul that she wanted to understand this stuff at a really, at a very, just all these little concepts we covered. If there was something she didn't understand, she would figure it out. She'd come and ask the right questions and get to where she had a really, really deep understanding of the conceptual stuff. And that stayed with me. I mean, that's the kind of thing that, as a professor, we love to see that. And we want to be able to tell med schools that we see that type of, of kind of an internal combustion engine, that's in someone. And, there are times when that's hard, you get exhausted, but you want to just try to really, if you're going to go into a class, just go all out with it. Don't settle for just kind of doing part of the work. And these are kind of cliches I'm throwing at you, but that's it's very important to really just keep intensity throughout a whole semester like she did.
Thank you. That makes me happy, because I do feel like one of the best things for me was the education at UNC Asheville. And I know we'll get to this question, but I tell every pre-med ever to go to UNC Asheville, because the teachers work for you there. And if you put in the effort, they put in twice as much back. And I don't know, I think that's what helped me so much through undergrad, because undergrad is hard. No matter where you go, it's going to be hard, especially when you're doing a pre-med track. But if you do throw yourself into every single class and just say, this is the most important thing to me right now. It's important to have a goal. It's really important to look ahead, but you create a narrative by having that goal and then throwing yourself into every single day, because it is exhausting. And I know I'll talk about this later, but you need to make sure that this is kind of what you want to do, because it makes every day enjoyable, no matter how tired you are.
And I just want to throw out something else, that one of the things I tell students too, because, and I want to say this because y'all really talked about class and stuff, but what I tell them is, whatever you're going to do, just do it well, and do something you enjoy. And if that's taking time off and, and going because you're burnout, or you want to take the summer and not do research or classes, but you want to, do something else, it's good if it's giving back to your community. It's nice if you can frame it around that, but it should be something you enjoy, and just do it as well as you can, because that's what makes the difference. So my next questions for you are kind of about the application, and then we're going to talk about MCAT prep. So first, and maybe we should talk about MCAT prep actually. Sorry, I'm going to rearrange. What is the best way to prepare for the MCAT, in your opinion?
You need to have a schedule. I feel like some people really thrive on time management and stuff, and some people do not. But it doesn't matter who you are, you've got to have a schedule, because that's what's going to keep you on track. It's really easy when you're sitting in front of a computer all day doing classes or whatever to say, okay, I'm done for today, I'll do it tomorrow. But that doesn't really work. It doesn't work in medical school. It doesn't work when you start to get further into your education. And when you're studying for a test that is as big as the MCAT, it doesn't work for you to cram it all into one thing. You have to understand those deep concepts. And so when you throw yourself into your classes and you understand those things, it helps you in the long run. So do not neglect them for the MCAT studying, but make sure that you have a schedule and take your time. There is no rush to take the MCAT. You'll need to create an itinerary for like how things are going to fall out. But if you need 6 months to study for the MCAT, take 6 months. If you need 3 months, take those 3 months, but just make sure that you have a schedule. And make sure you do what works best for you. You can go online and find about 700 different ways to study for the MCAT. You can use all of the practice books, you can do classes, you can use Anki cards, which people may be unfamiliar with that, but like an online flashcard system. You can use videos, you can use all of these practice exams, but you need to know and figure out what works best for you. Because if you don't figure out which way that you learn, you might kind of handicap yourself a little bit. Because when you sit down for that test, if it's not cemented in your brain, it's a high stress thing, so it's gonna go away. I know that was something that I messed up. I tried to adapt my studying to something that wasn't necessarily fitting for me because it seemed like it would be faster, and I think that did affect me in the long term. And I think another thing is practice tests. I will tell everybody that no matter how you study, what you do is you set these times to do practice exams, because there will be nothing like the MCAT. Dr. Meek's class is very much like, it prepares you in a lot of ways for the longevity of it. But his tests, I'm going to tell you this right now, his tests are way harder than anything you take in medical school. Sorry, Dr. Mix. It's true though. But the MCAT is testing you on such a wide breadth of things that his class will prepare you super good for that biology portion, but it won't do much for you in the chemistry section.
I just want to reiterate something you said, because I was in a conference with deans of admission from many of the North Carolina medical schools, and what they consistently said was take the MCAT, and also about AMCAS when you're ready. A lot of students want to rush it, and that is wait until you're ready. So if that takes you 3 months to study, if it takes you a month to study, if it takes you 6 months, if it takes you another year and you're going to wait and take some more upper level biology, chemistry classes, is usually what I recommend. You want to take it when you're ready. So what were the best UNCA courses specifically for you as an individual? That way, somebody else might have a different, not to shame anybody or give anyone too many kudos, but what were the best MCAT prep courses for you that you took at UNC Asheville?
The best MCAT, so Dr. Miggs always gets a shout out here, because cell biology was so big on the MCAT. You have a whole section that's essentially Dr. Miggs' class, where you're reading through all of this. I just always shout out for that, because you made us read through vignettes and figure out, okay, now what is this saying to you? And it's such hard science writing, and that's what the MCAT is. So that was always one of the biggest ones that I think got me through the MCAT. I think as far as like medical school, I think Dr. Meg's class helped me. I would also say physiology. There's so much physiology in medical school, and there are concepts that I feel like I'm way more prepared for than a lot of my peers. Because Dr. Nicolay actually taught in medical school. I'll give a shout out to him. So he knows what he's talking about. And he set me up really, really well for med school and physiology. Not to hurt Dr. Holt's feelings, but Dr. Holt's class helped me. I did organic chemistry with him. It helped me on the MCAT. You barely do any organic chemistry in medical school. You like throw that out of your head. But I think that one thing that I would suggest is genetics and maybe microbiology. I think those would help both for medical school and for the MCAT. I took microbiology, but I did not take genetics, and I regret it.
Did you take biochemistry?
I did take biochemistry. That also helped a ton on the MCAT. You don't do as much of that in medical school. You do some, but I think by the time you get to medical school after you've taken biochemistry, unless you major in it and do a ton of classes, it almost all leaks out of your brain.
Yeah. And did you take the biology or the chemistry-based biochemistry?
I took the chemistry-based one.
Yeah, good information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and and you covered those two questions that I had for you. Okay, so then as far as your AMCAS application, I guess just my first question would be what is your advice in general on doing the AMCAS application, like big picture kind of thing?
So one thing is you need to, I think it's called the MSAR, med school. I don't remember the exact acronym, but that is going to be your guides. That is your guide to where you're going to apply. Because once you take your MCAT, once you know your GPA, and once you kind of know your mission, and your mission can be wildly different than somebody else's. Mine was primary care, and some people, they want to go research, or some people want to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. And so you can have a big like difference in the way that you are going to pursue medical school versus your best friend. But you need to use that MSAR to figure out where you belong in these like giant network of 160 plus schools. So it's really important to use that because it gives you a fighting chance to get into that school. It tells you kind of the range of accepted people. And you know, if you make a 510 on the MCAT, you don't want to go to Johns Hopkins because their average MCAT is like 520 or something. You can throw an application there, but it might just be a donation. Maybe a tax write-off. I don't know how that works. But I think MSAR, like that is the thing to use when you're crafting your application. The second thing is see if you can have any resources. I know some people may be lower income and things like that. And there actually is some fee assistance when it comes to the like AAMC and even the DO system. The DO system, the cutoff is a little bit lower. So make sure that you are looking and seeing what is available for you, because that's going to be the best way to do it. I was a fee assistant applicant, and I think I got 20, I don't remember if it was 20 or 25 schools for free, both primaries and most of my secondaries, which was a tremendous help. So if you are a lower income student, don't let it discourage you because there are resources out there.
And I just want to take a moment so the MSAR is cheap. It's $21. When you apply to medical school, your first one is like $170 now. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like $170 for your first school. And then it's $41 for each additional school. And I can't tell you how many times I've had students in their primary application, they look at schools and they have an idea a little bit about it, and they pay $41 to send a primary, and then they learn a little bit more about the school and realize the average MCAT for the admitted students is like 123. Like, for example, University of New York or New York Med School, which is the one that's free, which is really appealing, but their average MCAT score is like 28. I'm sorry, not 28. I'm sorry, it's like 528. And you know, that's ridiculous. But so the MSAR is only $28. There's where that 28 was coming from. And then I wanted to show you, now this is from 2018. My current MSAR has lapsed, but hopefully that focuses in a little bit better. But it lets you look up and compare certain schools. And so here, and I'm sorry it's blurry, I don't know why it's so blurry. But Chapel Hill, it tells you the accepted MCAT, the median was 514. The students that matriculated or actually started med school, that was 513. There's the average GPA was 3.8. The matriculated GPA was 3.7. It also tells you things like the tuition, the fees, 90% received financial aid. The in-state, out-of-state. Here's another one. People will apply to schools that take 0 people from out of state, but still out-of-state students will apply. And you're like, you know, so this is really worth the money.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the money. I think I cannot say enough about how amazing that resource is. And I know that didn't show on there, but actually if you can switch between in-school, in-state, and out-of-state statistics, and so I know that 513, 514 can be scary, but I've met people here at UNC who or just a little bit above 500 because they were in state. And so make sure that you pick your schools wisely.
Yeah. And when we'll talk more about UNC, but, you know, and part of that is that, yeah, out of state's gonna be harder to get in generally. And if they have a lot of MD, PhD students, those students potentially, especially at a very competitive school like Chapel Hill, or Duke, you know, those students generally are going to cause that score inflation.
Dr. Meigs, yeah, I was going to say you got some.
Just on the sub, before we get away from talking about the MCAT, I wanted to ask you something because I usually tell my advisees that they should try to take the MCAT during a month when they're not just laden with other work, like, in class, like April might be a very difficult time to take the MCAT. I usually encourage my advisees, but I wanted to ask you about that. Like how important is it, in terms of clearing your schedule and having, like a few weeks to just completely focus on MCAT prep and practice tests and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it's vital. I think you really do need to be strategic about when you choose to schedule your MCAT, when you choose to study for it, because it is really time consuming. You can sit there for 6 hours a day and feel like you've not even made a dent in it. And then plus if you take this practice test, it's 6 hours if you're doing a full length. And I would tell people who do practice tests, emulate it like the test as much as possible. Don't have your phone. You get up for those breaks and you time those breaks exactly the way they would let you do it, even though there's really no constriction to it. But that means that you are taking all day, almost every day, studying for it. So having a time when you can just sit there and do it, and you're not worried about your assignments and you're not worried about all of your extracurriculars is really, really important. I know that that's not always possible for a lot of people. If you've got kids, you've got a job, you've got things that you've got to do, but that battle is kind of set in front of you. And so it will help you later in the long run if you can learn how to do that and to manage those things and how to clear your schedule, how to sit there and just study 100%, because when you get to medical school, it doesn't stop. So yeah, I think it's really important to try to do it in a way that gives you the maximum amount of time.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say that in a different way. Students will tell me that they took a lot of section tests, and I tell them I don't think it's the same, because it's that stamina. If you're going to run a marathon, 26.2 miles, but you only practice by running 6 miles at a time, that marathon's going to, you're probably not going to make it. So yeah, and that's really important. Thank you for sharing that. So you said you did the fee assistance program, which, by the way, will also, when y'all apply for that, if you apply and are accepted, I believe it goes from calendar year to calendar year, or maybe it's for a year and a half, and you can reapply. They allow you a discount on taking the MCAT. They allow you, it might just be one free AMCAS application that includes, and you said you thought it was like 15 or 20 schools?
I think it was 20 to 25. I don't remember exactly. Yeah.
And so, well, one of my questions was how many schools did you apply to, but do you know how many, have you heard from some of your colleagues in medical school, how many they applied to? Do you have a sense of what you would recommend to people if they don't get the fee assistance program scholarship?
20 is still, like, the reason they give you 20 free ones is because that's about the average. That is kind of the smart way to do it. I know I've heard some crazy people who are like, I applied to 3 schools and then they actually get in. So it's not incredibly insane to do that, but it lowers your chances. So I would say 20. If you can swing it, that would be the number you should shoot for. I've heard people apply to 40, and that's a ton of work and that's a ton of money. But if they are destined to go to medical school, they're going to make their net as wide as possible.
Yeah, and I've always heard like 15, 16. I think 40 might be a little excessive, but it depends on your money. It is expensive, and it's important to start looking at the price, and I'm telling this to other students, but also think about it as the big picture. You're going to medical school, which even if you're in-state tuition, and then if you're borrowing money for tuition and you're borrowing money for living expenses, you're probably going to be about 150 to 200,000 in debt. So 3,000 to pay for the application process and being successful, so that you can then get out and be a doctor for the rest of your life. That you need to look at it that way. Mm-hmm. So okay, advice on completing, like how to pace out completing the AMCAS, the parts that are that may be deceivingly time consuming, and when should students submit it?
So, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it opens up in March, right? That's when the AMCAS, when does it open?
Yeah, it opens, my understanding, it's usually like the first week in May, and you can start putting your information in. Well, let me back up. So the AAMC has a document that's like 80 pages long or something that tells you everything that's going to be asked on the application. So you can get this ready ahead of time. The the system actually opens like in the first week of May. You can actually hit submit in June, and it's the first or second week in June. And that's when they start processing and verifying like all your grades and stuff. So it doesn't even get to schools until after that. So
Aaliyah held up 3 fingers. Does that mean it's the 3rd week or the 3rd of May?
The 3rd of May.
Okay. So it opens up in May, and that means you have a month to work on it, like actually in the application. And so I'm going to tell you, I didn't take the prep stuff and like write out my essays because that was too much work. Because for me, if I spend 2 months or 3 months or 4 months agonizing over it, I'm going to make all these mistakes. I'm going to get exhausted by it. And I'm going to be like, I'm done with this. But if I give myself a month to have people look over it, to have my redos of it and looking at all of the things and adding stuff in, that gave me more than enough time. But my best advice is as soon as that submit button opens, you submit it. Because the thing is, you have to have your transcripts in. So when that stuff opens up in May, you put an order in for your transcripts, like for your official transcripts. Even if you're not graduated, you'll have to send another one in to those schools that you get accepted to. So as soon as you get the opportunity, press submit, because early bird gets the worm. If your application hits the admissions committee's desk before someone who, may have a better MCAT, may have a better GPA, and may have a better application, but you got there first. And so you're the first one that they see, as opposed to the person who waited 2 months later. As far as secondaries go, you get those back. Generally, sometimes you'll get them in June. It usually takes a little bit because you have to get your application verified. So what they do is it's like when you apply for a job, you have to do a job resume, and then you also have to go in and do their job application. So you're putting the same information like 17 times. Very tedious. So for the AMCAS application, you have to do the same thing. All of your coursework has to go in, and then you have to send them a transcript. And then they say, well, we have to have somebody who's professional look over this and tell you if you're wrong about your own classes. So that could take a little bit of time. And so the later you wait, the longer that wait to get everything approved is. And then it's longer until it hits an admission committee's desk. So as soon as you possibly can, have all your transcripts in and everything. As far as secondaries, your letter of recommendation is sent, or your committee letter is sent with your secondaries. So I will kind of jump ahead and ask about letter of recommendation. You give the people who are writing your letters of recommendation as much time as you can possibly afford. So if you know you're applying in 3 months, you send them an email and you say 90 days, I need it by this point, because one, you want to give them time, because if they're doing you a favor, you need to give them as much time as possible. They are busy people. But the second thing is that you want to have it done by that point. So you try to give them as much time so that they will be ready in whatever time. So your secondary has to have the letters, usually before they'll read those. And the secondaries can be just as tedious as the primary, but if you've applied to 20 schools, you're doing it 20 times. And again, I'm talking about the job resume and job application. You sometimes have to put all of your coursework in again. You probably have to do all of these things over again. So give yourself as much time as you possibly can afford to do those. But they say the turnaround time should be about 2 weeks. You should not take any longer than 2 weeks to resubmit your secondary, if you can afford it.
And I will say to the students that the pre-health committee it's made up of multiple people. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you're applying to med school, whether it's MD, DO, or you're applying to dental school, you need a committee letter of recommendation, and it's a composite letter. We get supplemental quotes and stuff from other people. And I have a document, I'm trying to find it right now, but I will post it in the chat in just a second. That gives you more information, but basically you would choose someone on the pre-health committee to be your primary writer, but then you're responsible for reaching out and helping them get those other pieces and parts that come in. But the committee also officially will not write your letter until you have an MCAT score. Now, that can flex a little bit. Like with Kristen, we all knew Kristen really well. We worked closely with her. We knew what date she was taking the MCAT. I think she took it like the first week of May or something. And she's been studying, and we're like, she's applying, she's going. And so it was up to her primary letter writers. It's his or her prerogative whether they will start writing the letter early. And some of us will when we know the student and we know they're reliable. But otherwise, you have to have an actual score because that is included in your letter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing about that is your MCAT takes a month to get back. So when you are scheduling it, just keep that in mind. And when you're looking at your letters and stuff, and you've got all these supplemental quotes, so you can start bothering people for letters of recommendation early. So I had one of my supervisors from work and people I had worked with, and it was a pretty wide array of people I asked for letters, but they have to go to the committee, and then the committee has to have time. So try to get those done as early as possible.
And do you have any advice for how to ask someone for a letter of recommendation, who you choose, and how you went about it? Because some people might be nervous about that.
Do it very kindly. They're doing you, but I tried to get somebody from every realm of my AMCAS application. So the person who was my supervisor, who I had a good relationship with, I asked her for a letter. One of the clients that I worked with at my job, I had their mom write me one because she and I had a great connection. I asked somebody from one of the clinics I worked at MAHEC, because I'd worked with this person for almost a year at that point. I worked a semester and a summer. I think that was one of my stronger letters. He was a big advocate. I remember emailing him later, and he's like, "Absolutely, I'm so glad." And he was super sweet. And so every realm that I could possibly get somebody from, I had Dr. Nealon, even though he is my letter writer, I was like, please make sure you put a good word in for me. And other teachers and professors that I had worked with who I knew would write me a good letter, who maybe were not on the committee, just like, go put a quote in if you feel like you can. So do it with people that know you well, that you know well, and then do it with as much kindness and grace as you possibly can, because they're about to have your future in their hands.
Yeah, not that because I'm one of those people that folks might ask, but and so let me put it this way. So they're going to take their extra time to write about you. They're probably tired just like you. So imagine if someone just came up and said, "Hey, could you write like a 2-page paper about this?" And you're like, "Oh my God, really?" Yes, but you got to, it's just time. But we do it because we care, and we enjoy. We put you in an honest light, but in the best possible honest light we can. And so it's good to ask people you have a good relationship with. And a lot of times the best, what I usually ask students, especially if I haven't had them in a while, is send me some information. I'll be more specific for a pre-med letter and ask for like a resume or their personal statement. But if it's someone like applying to something else, I'll say, tell me something about the class you had. What stood out for you? What was meaningful to you? And when the student writes back and tells me like about one of the assignments, like a project they did and what it meant to them, and I remember they did a good job with it, but I didn't really, have that extra insight. That gives me so much more to write about. So reaching out to people, giving them something to go on for the letter, because you're kind of helping them write it. And you're like, look at how great I am in this here. And then they're like, oh yeah, you were great. Let me write about that.
Yeah, Dr. Miggs, I feel like you get a lot of letter requests. What is helpful for you?
So I usually ask the students to send me the same personal statement that they're going to provide to AMCAS. And it doesn't even have to be finished. It can be some draft or outline. I don't expect it to be all perfect. It gives me a good sense of what they're presenting to the medical schools, and that helps me in shaping my letter a bit to try to cover that. That's the main thing. I think, and I usually will try to talk to the student a bit. You want to definitely. I'll often help students decide like who they want to ask, because sometimes you want to be, I think we've had students in the past who kind of felt like, well, okay, I've got all these different people I think can write for me, so I'm just going to ask everybody. And like we had one letter one time that had like 13 contributors, and I think the problem with that letter, once it was finished, was I think a lot of the good stuff was kind of obscured by just the sheer quantity of information in that letter. I think that, I don't know, I think maybe having a total of 7 or 8, maybe 9 contributors to a letter is probably about as high as one would want to go. And so I try and give them a little bit of that sort of feedback going into the process. But yeah, it helps me immensely if a student sends me a bit of a personal statement. Again, it doesn't have to be it's not there to, like, they don't have to worry about it being all polished and perfect grammar and everything for me. I tell them that. I say, just send me something, just some draft, because that is very useful to me.
I will just add to that the way I look at it is that if I had 7 or 8 or 10 comments, I wouldn't necessarily use them all. I'd use the best ones. And so, and then I also want to throw out, and again, I feel like I'm, kind of patting myself on the back here or something, but writing thank you notes, it is a little thing. I personally hate doing it. My mom always tried to make me do it, but you know what? I don't even know if Dean Holt is still here. I don't know if he's still listening, but he was cleaning out his office once and he handed me something. And this was like 5 years ago. So I had just started working at UNC Asheville. And he hands me this thing and I look at it. He had pulled it from his shelf. And I'm like, God, I recognize this card. I open it up and it's a thank you card that I had written him from him writing me a letter of recommendation. And so, I mean, that's how meaningful it is. And that's the kind of heart and soul we put into this stuff. And so it's just, it feels really good. I mean, I'm kind of like talking about the relationships that you build at UNCA, which y'all are already experiencing that, but also just to, Kristen, I have one from Kristen that's up on my wall, which was really sweet that she left me, and I didn't expect it, but it was just, it's really nice to, and y'all can empathize with this. It's nice when people appreciate you. And so, and this is the rest of your life, but giving back, like you're going to ask for help, you're going to give help back and forth. So, okay. So, and I also just want to reemphasize submitting your application as early as possible. Okay. I heard from another, Aaliyah, I was in that thing too, talking about the application, and one of the, I think she was on an admissions committee, like UC California or something. And she talked about how, it's first come, first serve as far as verifying the MCAS application. And so if your application, if you're working at a medical school on the admissions committee and the first load of completed applications comes in, you're kind of excited and you're looking, and then you do that for a couple of months. And then you're like, oh my God. And there's a big stack already, of people that they were like, I like this person, but we're just going to wait. We're not sure right now, or maybe they're waitlisted. So the earlier you can be in that, the better. But also, kind of like we said, would take the MCAT when you're ready, apply to med school when you're ready. And if you are applying late and you're like looking at the deadline for when the last day you can turn it in, you're not ready. And that's someone who turns it in the first like month. That's somebody who they had all their ducks in a row. So and that's okay. Like I was not ready the first time I applied. I applied kind of late when I did apply. I was not ready, so I didn't apply the first time. And I was like, I'm gonna wait, I'm not ready. And then I still wasn't ready, but I still applied, but I applied really late, and I didn't get in. And so for me, but when the second time when I applied, I was ready. I was mentally, emotionally, and everything else in my life was lined up. Like I was ready, and I got a large, well, not a lot. I got a number of acceptances. So that's just the importance of not trying to rush things. So we talked about
second. Want to say something here?
Yeah.
Sorry,
I can't see everybody.
That's all right. I just wanted to add something about the timing of getting your contributors to send their materials to the committee. We like Dr. Maxwell said, we won't submit a letter until we have the MCAT scores, because we write the letter, where we try and frame those and maybe explain like why a part of the MCAT may have been, a section was lower than another section for a particular student. We want to give evidence to maybe suggest that they do in fact have a good grasp of some subject where the MCAT didn't quite go their way or such. But it is okay for the contributors to send us material on you well before you're going to get your MCAT scores, because what we'll do is we'll start assembling the letter. We'll have it kind of in a frame where it's kind of waiting for some of the final touches to be put on it when the MCAT scores do roll in. So just in terms of, in other words, you don't need to tell your contributors that they can't even send the committee anything until you have your MCAT scores in your hand. You can ask those comments to come into us, a good ways before that. It's just that we won't finalize the letter until we've seen everything, including the MCAT scores. So.
You're muted, Dr. Maxwell.
Another point on that. So I'm officially the pre-health coordinator. Dean Holt is officially the director. You can choose one of us to be the contact person. And I have students who, as sophomores, had a letter of recommendation sent to me, and I just create a folder with their name and I just start collecting it. And then later, if a student says, oh, I'm going to have Dr. Meigs or I'm going to have Dr. Nealon write the letter, I'm like, here's the folder. So, yeah, and I'm happy to be the collector of those things. But I want to give y'all, I'm just going to sign Dr. Holt up for it as well as just to give y'all another option.
Thank you.
She's volunteering you to do stuff, Dr. Holt. You're her boss.
Kristen, what did you find to be your biggest challenge in medical school? And that may not be that's not COVID related necessarily. And what did you wish you knew leaving Asheville that you didn't know?
It's a little weird with COVID times and this may skew it, but I think the hardest possible thing for me was that I didn't realize the sacrifice you had to make. You kind of go through undergrad and you're making sacrifices. You're doing things that your peers are not doing. You are busy all the time. But when you go to medical school, most of the time you're moving away. I'm from Asheville, so I'm moving to Chapel Hill. And so my support system's home. It's back in Asheville. And building that from the ground up has been hard. And one thing that they say all the time is that you have three things. You have spirituality, you have family, and you have money. And you have to choose which two you're going to sacrifice. And money's always going to be one of them. So you either got to choose friends or family, because somebody's going to have to not go necessarily, but you're going to have to take time from somewhere. So you lose your spirituality, you lose your family, you lose a little bit like of your friends because of the fact that either your friends don't understand where you're going. They don't understand the time commitment. If you're a first generation like I am, your parents don't fully understand what medical school looks like or even what undergrad looks like. And so you're like, oh, well, you had a ton of time for me in undergrad. Why do you not have time for me now? Why do I get a 15-minute phone call once a week? And you're like, that's because I'm so busy. So the lack of support system and just kind of the sacrifices, that I think was the hardest thing. And I think people just need to understand, and that's kind of always my wrap up message, but I'll get a little bit here, is you have to make sure this is what you want to do, because you are going to have to make sacrifices, unfortunately. And people are probably no stranger to sacrifices. That people are going through undergrad and it's so hard. It is. And you guys have to do so much more almost. Like you have to diversify your portfolio in such crazy ways that you already know what it's like to sacrifice. But when you go to medical school, it's like it becomes real. And you kind of look at all of your friends who are getting married, and you look at your friends that are having kids, and you look at your friends that are making money. And you're like, I am now spending money to basically feel like I'm being tortured day in and day out. And you have to find the joy in that, because otherwise it seems kind of sad to you. Like it's just because you're looking at all your friends and saying, why am I not doing that? Why am I not home celebrating my mom's birthday party? Well, it's because I'm here studying, because I've got a test tomorrow. So I think the thing that I would want to know is how hard this was going to be and how much sacrifice was going to be needed.
Yeah, I just want to throw out that that's a good question. Thank you, Dean Holt. That when I was there, they said you get one thing. You have medical school and you get one other thing, and that's family. Or if you like, if you're really into like road biking, you get to road bike, or frisbee golf, you get to play frisbee golf, or kind of get one other thing. But Kristen, what I'll say to you too is that the first year of medical school is the hardest because of that transition. The second year, I think they're actually giving you more. You have more of a load. They're giving you more information, but you've adjusted. Like you're like, this is now what my new normal is, And so I think you will find that it does get a little bit. You'll adjust better, but yeah, and you will get those questions from your family, like, why the people don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it has gotten easier. Please don't let me sit here and say it's all doom and gloom, because I love every day of this. As crazy as that sounds, I love medical school more than I've loved any academic venture in my entire life. It has been the most fulfilling thing for me. And I say that in all honesty. I have loved every bit of medical school, no matter how hard it has been. And every sacrifice that I've made, sometimes I'm like, oh, this maybe wasn't worth it. But, you know, most of the sacrifices I've made have been completely worth it. And it does get better, because at some point when you first enter med school, you were like, what did I just do to myself? What did I just do? And you are so overwhelmed and everything just seems like it's spinning so fast. But then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, like you find your stride and you just get going. And you are actually surprised by how well you start to do. And by, you can watch a lecture in 2 times speed and how much information you pick up in that 5 minutes that you just watched a video that should take in 10. Like it becomes this, you are almost amazed by your own capabilities. And so it definitely gets better. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's kind of lonely.
And I just want to harken back to something you said about that organic chemistry class, which I will say that I've learned almost everything I know about organic from Dean Holt as a student and as a professor. But what you're learning in those kind of classes, because sometimes students are like, why do I have to learn this? Why do I have to learn physics? Like, what you're learning is how to learn. And you're learning how to think about things in different ways and problem solve and hold a lot of different challenging information in your head and think analytically, think critically, and make decisions. And all those skills that, even though like organic doesn't seem like it really helps, but it's laying this foundation of how to study. It's laying some foundation in relationships but it's kind of creating a more complex system so that when you're in Kristen's shoes at UNC and they're giving you information, you're like, okay, I can do this. I can do this. I remember I had a friend at UNC taking biochemistry, and I looked over he was in his first year, and I was at UNC Asheville taking biochemistry, and I looked down at his notes and I was thinking, God, I'm learning the exact same thing. The difference is he's learning it in a month and I'm learning it over like 6 weeks, but he's prepared for that. And I wasn't at the time, but that's what you're doing. You're really just kind of training for this. I think that too, this is a weird perspective, but why is it so stressful? I think it's partly that you're learning the time management skills, and you're also learning how to balance your stress and your emotions, and hopefully being able to acknowledge them and take care of them, but also like not fall apart because of them. So if you're ever feeling like this is so stressful, it's an unfortunate part of the process. At least that's the only thing that I've come up with. Someone else may know something better.
No, I mean, I agree. Like that's, my dad always calls it systemic hazing. That's what he said. Like they make you jump through these hoops. They make you do these things where it's like, why do I ever need to know what like the speed of a photon is? Why would I ever need to know this in medical school? I'm not going into ophthalmology. Not that you even need it then, but it's a matter of like teaching you how to do this. And it's partially to see, will you do it? If we tell you to do it, will you do it? Like how willing are you to go through this length to come work with us? Because you're going to work with patients, and patients will push your buttons until the end of the day, just for fun. Sometimes they'll do these things just to see if they can get your reaction. And if you start reacting because they're making you figure out how to figure out the speed of a photon, what's going to happen when that patient goes, I'm not doing this, or I don't care if you tell me to stop smoking, I'm going to do it anyway. Like it becomes this matter of like, it's training you to become the best person that you can be.
Or your colleagues are challenging you. And there's so many layers of that. Mm-hmm. So we are, there's so much rich information, but I'm looking at the time, and I do want to cover our last few questions. And I'm happy, and I have a whole bunch of links that I'm going to share with everyone where you can just find easy information, including stuff about UNC. But I do know that sometimes students they come from a place like UNC Asheville where you might have the class like max size of like 40 students. And then you go to a place like, you're looking at medical schools, and UNC, I think, accepts now like 180 or
it's
so.
200 now, 200, and they're going to, I think, go up to 210 is their goal.
Whew. So how are you able to get to know other students and your faculty? Are you able, like, what is life like in medical school at UNC, but also like to help build community? Yeah.
Yeah. So again, COVID has made all of this very hard, but there are programs for every single person. I struggle with that. I left UNC Asheville. I came from a small high school. I went to UNC Asheville where I feel like everybody knew who I was. And then I came here and I was like, nobody knows me and I'm not going to know anybody. And I was terrified. I was genuinely terrified. But then I got into the Kenan Scholars Program, which you may have information about that and stuff. And that's this really small cohort. There's like 12 of us. It's such a small thing. And the coordinator knows my name. She knows my face. I've had a phone call with her daughter because we're just like it's just what happens. It becomes kind of a family thing. So you find your niche, and usually those niches are not nearly as big as 200 people. And one thing that I always say, and people will figure out their own path in medical school, but the best thing that I have done to make connections is going to lecture every single day, because the professors know my name. Even if my camera's off, my little face is on there. So they know who I am. And so I've gotten nice encouragement from people that I've never actually spoken to because they're my lecturer, and they know who I am because I'm sitting there listening to them every single day. And so you actually will find yourself separating kind of a little bit. And so it seems huge. 200 people seems really, really big. But you will find your people, and you'll actually be really pleased when you find those people because their thoughts and goals align with yours.
Thank you. I didn't have that link, but I'm putting it in now. And so another, and what other programs? So you talked about the Kenan Scholars Program. What other programs are there at UNC that you've been able to get involved in that to help you kind of pursue your interests and your connection with others? Just talk more about it.
So I'm a scholarly concentration, and at UNC, you've got something called scholarly concentrations where you can get a special little accommodation and you get special training in one certain area. So there's ultrasound. I mean, there's 1,000 of them, so I won't ever remember all of them. There's ultrasound, there's humanities, I think. There's LGBTQ+, there is geriatrics. That's off the top of my head. I think there's like 10 of them. I don't ever remember how many there are, but you apply for those. And it's fairly selective. Oh, there's also med ed. So like you are interested in teaching, so medical education. And so that's a cohort as well. But you apply for those and they're very small. And so I'm in the geriatrics scholarly concentration. So I will get special training in that. I also run the geriatrics interest group on campus. Not that I want to necessarily go into geriatrics, but I know if I work in a rural area, a huge part of my patient population will be older. And so it's incredibly important to me to serve those individuals to the best of my ability. So I run that stuff. And then there's also something called the healer's art. If you come to UNC, and I feel like a lot of schools do that, and they've done it for a long time, but it's essentially where you meet with other first, second, and maybe sometimes even third years, and then a faculty mentor. And it's a group of maybe 4 or 5 of you, and you get to know those people really, really well. Because I call it group therapy. It's very touchy-feely, but it was amazing. And so there are 1,000 things like that on campus that you can do. There's Campos, where you are doing Spanish speaking specifically. There is SHAC, which is the student health clinic, which that's becomes a small little family in and of itself. There are about 1,000 things you can do, and you will find the things. And that's just something that I do. And I could do about 100 more of them if I had the time.
And okay, so kind of the last 2 questions I have, and then we'll skim we'll open it up and look through the chat and see if there's questions. But best advice, so 2 questions. What is your best advice for an aspiring future doctor? And what do you wish someone had said to you, or what do you wish you had known?
I've kind of answered what I wish I would known. I wish I would known the sacrifices that I would have to make. And but another thing that I also wish is I wish someone would have told me how much that I would have loved it. I didn't expect it, genuinely, because I feel like a lot of the people you hear are like, oh my gosh, medical school, that's crazy. And some people hate it, and that's totally valid. Some people hate every second of it, but you have to prepare yourself to walk into it and just love every second of it and not feel bad about that. Don't feel bad about loving it. Just because all of your friends are complaining does not mean that you're in the wrong. But you'll also find a lot of people do hate it. So don't guilt yourself for however you feel about how medical school is going. But the best advice that I have, which again, I touched on this, is don't do this unless you love it. You kind of know that in your heart. If your parents are saying you have to be a doctor, maybe look at other things that make you passionate. And I always say, would you do this if you were not getting paid at all? Because that's where you should follow your heart. You're just really lucky if you say medicine is where you're going to go, because then you make the big bucks as soon as you get out and you're like, I made the right decision. But don't do it unless you love it, because you are selling you're selling your life to medical school for at least 7 years, depending on what residency you go into. 4 years of medical school, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of residency. And you make a lot of sacrifices. You make a ton. And if you don't love it, it can kind of beat you down. So that would be my best advice, is you have to know that you love it.
I just want to throw out that so like I never said to you about how many sacrifices, because I didn't want to scare you away, because I saw you doing everything you needed to do to be successful in medical school, and you were still happy with it and still okay with it. But in most doctors, most physicians will say, I wouldn't do it again, because they don't want to go through med school, they don't want to go through residency again. But it's an investment. And if you ask them, then, do you love your job? And then they'll say, most of them say yes. Like they see their patients and they want to go and care for them, and they would do it for free. So.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say is the best advice I got was from Dr. Maxwell herself. I'm probably going to embarrass her, but she said at some point that medical school was basically like self-flagellating. You have to be almost a masochist to do it. Which I always laugh. I always laugh because it's so true. It is so true. And I know for at least like the last humanities you have to take, you have to read the Sisyphus. At least you have to analyze it. You may not read it. I'm not going to judge you if you don't. But it's essentially, Sisyphus is pushing, or is just his punishment is pushing a rock up the hill and then watching it roll down every single day. And that's what every single day feels like in med school. But it's always the line, you have to imagine Sisyphus happy. And that's what I tell myself every single day. On my iPad, my background is Sisyphus rolling up, and it says you have to imagine Sisyphus happy, because I genuinely do. It's like every single day I wake up and I have to push that rock up the hill and then watch it roll down again. But I wake up the next day and I'm like, I'm gonna do it again and I'm gonna love it. So it was just like Dr. Maxwell saying, you basically are self-punishing yourself. And I'm like, Sisyphus did it and he was happy, so we're doing this.
Yeah, I put in the chat, the beatings will continue until morale improves. That is a favorite of a lot of residents, especially. But it's also the other thing, and Kristen is just beginning to get this experience, when you connect with people, for me, what I really miss about teaching versus medicine is you walk into the patient's room and there's already this expectation that you're going to start asking them some maybe private questions, personal questions, and it's okay, but you need to build rapport and be respectful with it. But those moments where, like, I had a moment with someone, long story short, I was talking to a woman who was probably 65 or 70 about her mom's end of life. And I took the time to explain things to her, which no one else had done. And then I was like, do you understand? Okay, great. And then I just got up and she said, hold on a second. And she's like, can I hug you? And I mean, I'm getting chills right now. And that is something that is, that is the great privilege. So yes, you're Sisyphus. It's a burden and a privilege. So I want to make sure that I don't want to scare everyone away. That's what I don't want to do. Okay, so those are all my questions that I had, and I have a whole bunch of links that I can put in the chat, but I'm hoping that if y'all have any questions that you will unmute yourself or raise your hand or put it in the chat. Yes, oh yeah.
Hi. Okay, so Kristen, you talked earlier about how you kind of didn't really like the way you practiced or studied for your MCAT. So can you talk a little bit about what you wish you would have done to better prepare yourself for taking it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that I learned by hearing it. I will be honest, when I took biochemistry, I sat in 2 classes. I sat in both the lecture class. It was very intensive. And it was almost a little painful sometimes, but because I had to listen to it, I had to hear it repeatedly. And I knew that about myself, is that I have to hear it. And if I hear it, I'll remember it. But I was like, it's going to be faster if I read this book. I had MCAT books that someone had given to me. I said, it'll be faster if I read these books. And so I did. And now I didn't fail my MCAT by any means, but my score could have been better had I gone with what I already knew would be good for me. But I read those books instead, and I took notes on them. And I have never, ever, ever in my life been someone who can read a book like that and take notes on it, because it's so dry and I do not pay attention. But I tried it. And I think that it's not, and that could be right for somebody else if that's the way you study. But for me personally, if I had used those Khan Academy videos and then taken tests on it, I think I would have done much better.
Thank you. And then I also had another question. I know you said that you should send in your secondaries like within that first 2 weeks of getting it, but like how long did it take you to, I guess, finish writing it? Because for me, I definitely need, like, I don't know, I'm not the best writer yet, but I just need time to, I don't know, get my words out on the paper in the right way.
Yeah, if you have a problem with writing and like synthesizing your thoughts, I'm not gonna like link anything because I don't know how sketchy it is, but you can go on Reddit. I always just go on Reddit. They have all the secondary prompts, almost all of them, and you can find them. And they are usually updated year to year, because sometimes the secondaries will change a little bit because med schools do catch on. But that will give you time to pre-write your secondaries. And that gives you plenty of time so that when that 2 week mark comes, you're like, I've got these essays, I'm gonna copy and paste. And then some of them are redundant. So some of them will ask you the same exact thing repeatedly. So you just make sure that you're not putting that's like, oh, I'm not going to Chapel Hill School of Medicine, I'm writing it for Emory. So you're going to want to make sure you do not send a secondary that says Chapel Hill in it. But at some point it gets kind of redundant when you do enough. So there's plenty of time as long as you kind of prepare yourself for it.
As for that peer review and proofreading part of it, it always helps to have like another set of eyes to look over that, whether it's, a mentor or another student, or even someone who's been trained to look over this kind of stuff, whether it's statements or different sources of assignments. Case in point, UNCA has its own writing center, which I'm going to do this little shameless plug, but
Yes,
I'm also one of the writing consultants there. So being a pre-health student too, I would be certainly happy to look over any of your personal statements at any point between now and also throughout next year. Same goes for anybody who is also in this meeting too. If you want to schedule a meeting with me, or any one of my consultant or any one of my coworkers too, who would be happy to look over that with you, so that we can help you get your story out, which is one of the key parts of getting your application together.
And for me, it seems like a daunting kind of I should just bite the bullet and do it. Do like a presentation, kind of talk about some key strategies to writing those. And a lot of times what I see students do is they spend too much time setting up the scene and talking about the details of what happened. But what people want to know is, how did it impact you? How did it change you? What did you learn? And what are you going to do with that information? So set it up in like one sentence, and then spend a whole bunch of other sentences talking about what it meant and what you're going to do with it and how it's going to influence your future practice. And another big thing that they talk about is don't say it, show it. So don't say, I like connecting with students, blah, 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 blah. Show it. I walked my dog and talked to Kristen for like an hour. It was like, blah, 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 because I was so excited to like be able to talk to her today. So I would be writing about how I take this extra time, that is actually fun for me to engage with students and check in and see how they're doing. that's a bad example, but getting advice on for the Writing Center, absolutely. Please take advantage of the resources that UNCA makes available. Other questions, other thoughts?
I have a question. I was
Yes.
wondering how you prepared for the interviews.
So that was really hard. I did do a mock interview with Dr. Maxwell, but honestly, helpful as it was Dr. Maxwell. So, Dr. Maxwell and I hang out, like, it's fine. Like, it was super weird to have this like semi-formal fake thing. And so I took it seriously, but it was really hard to say, when I go to an admissions committee that I do not know and have an interview, it's not going to be Dr. Maxwell sitting in front of me.
Good point.
So I prepared for interviews I asked so many people. How do I prepare for interviews? You know what they said to me 1,000 times? It always made me mad. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. They always told me. And it made me so mad because I'm like, well, what if they don't like me? What if they don't like who I am? How do I prepare for this? Like, what do I do? So my best advice, honestly, is there's like a list of really common questions. And I think Dr. Maxwell may have it. So just look through those and do not write anything down. Do not, because at some point, these admission committees members have been on there long enough that they know when you're practicing. They know that when you've got this rehearsed in your head. So what you do is you go through and look at them and say, how would I answer that question? And then have a general framework and then go from there. Because they'll ask you questions that will just knock your socks off. And you're like, where did that come from? And it's insane. So just go in there and be yourself. But for the most common questions, have a framework and read both your AMCAS application and your secondary before you walk into that interview, because they might ask about those things. And then the last piece of advice I have is do not write anything on either your secondaries or your primary that you would not want discussed in your interview. Because I had people ask me very personal things that I wrote about in my personal statement. And I knew walking in that they may ask me those things. So if you're like, I write about this harrowing experience in my life, and you're like, I don't want to talk about it though, I'm only okay writing about it, do not put it on there, because they will bring it up and they will ask you about it. So those are like my big things. Like, 1, have a good common answer. 2, be yourself and just laugh and tell them you're nervous. And then 3, don't put anything out there that you would not want them to ask you directly about.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Good questions. And one benefit that I think about, and you've talked about this, kind of thinking about the questions. What I did when I was preparing way back when was kind of I had some like note cards that I could hold up in the car as I was driving to my next, my interview 4 hours away or something. And I did put some like bullet points on the back of these are the key ideas about this. But a benefit to practicing is that you become more refined in how you say something, so that instead of rambling for, however long, you can actually like get to the meat of the real meaning that you want to convey. So I do think it's good to talk. I see what you say about being too casual. What I did with one student was a lot of schools are starting to do the MMIs, mini medical interviews. Yeah, and it's like basically you get 10 minutes with someone, and you might get a scenario about something that's happening, or patient or a situation, like you see a car wreck. I don't know. It could be anything, or and that you read that and then you go in, they ask you questions. Or it could just be you go in and they just are like, hi, and they get to know you. And so what I did with this student to try to practice, to try to mimic it, was like turned off my camera, turned it back on, and I introduced myself again as if I was someone different. But yeah, well, that information is out there as to what kind of, and I think the MSAR may have that information too about what kind of interviews they have at that school in MMI or more traditional. And then don't BS. Their BS radars are highly tuned in. I thought I was really tactful. I probably told this story to a couple of y'all, but I thought it was really tactful because, like, when I was a teenager, I was a little bit of a hellion, and I tried to convey, kind of some of the what happened, but just say like it was difficult at home, blah blah blah. And then after the interview, I thought it was really, I was honest, but I thought I was pretty smooth. And after the interview, and this woman was a pediatrician, and I think they are really good at their puberty, pubescent kids, BS radar. And we're waiting for the elevator, and she said something that's totally it basically said like, just basically I was a hellion teenager, and and I was like, oh my God, she totally knew. So, I mean, they're really tuned in people. But that was okay. It didn't, I mean, I got into that school apparently, and I think it was like Kristen was saying, like I was myself, I was honest, but I was able to frame things in a way that was concise and put a positive spin on it that maybe I wouldn't have if I hadn't practiced.
Thank you.
Good questions. Okay, y'all, I don't want to take up your whole night. I will put some links in the chat. If y'all have more questions, what I'm going to do now is just put some links in the chat. I already put a bunch of them, but I'm going to put them all in one place for med school resources. And then I'm going to do a bunch of UNC resources, and you should be able to copy them from the chat.
Yeah,
If
and I can't stick my email in the chat because I can only send it to certain people. So I'm going to send my email to Dr. Maxwell really fast and let her copy and paste it over. You guys are free at any point to email me. I love this. This is kind of part of why I do this, is I love interacting with people. I like mentoring people. So please contact me and we can talk things out. If you need me to read through essays, like I will gladly do it.
I've got some essays from students I need you to read through.
I'm not doing your grading for you.
I see.
Yeah, I had to email it to you because I can't put it in the chat for everybody.
God, I was being all, oh, y'all couldn't put comments in there. Okay. Any other questions?
Kristen, Chapel Hill obviously is a pretty fun place to be. A lot of things going on. A lot of it's a lively atmosphere there. How challenging is it for the med students to kind of block all that out and focus on everything that has to be done in the course of a week?
So I live in my apartment and I stay in my apartment and I don't leave my apartment. I live off campus, so that has been fantastic because there's no noise. And with COVID, you drive down Franklin Street, even with COVID, it was terrible. No mask, frat parties going on. It was terrible. But I just have to stay where I know that I can study the best. Because if I go to campus, I know I'm just going to talk for hours and it's a problem. So I know where I work best, but I have friends who go to campus because they can't work at home. Just know what you do best. And then that will tell you what you need to do in order to block everything out. Because if I went to campus, honestly, like some of my peers do, they're all there till midnight. And I am like, I would sit there and talk until I was hoarse. So
When I was there, we had a test every 2 weeks. And so the weekend before a test, you just studied. But the other weekend, well, until Monday night, everyone would there was just kind of like, it just worked out where Brick's pizza place had discount pizzas and beer on Monday night. So everyone would go there. And so that was kind of a nice way to just connect with people, grab a meal, and then go home. And then the other weekend, when you didn't have to stay for a test, I don't know what I think there were a lot of younger people. I was older when I was there, and a lot of people drank a lot. And because there's also a mentality of you work hard, party hard thing, which I saw as a bit of a problem, but at times. But anyway, I wasn't into that. So then I would go hiking with my dog. I'd go ride my bike. I was, just be able to have a little bit that one other thing we got to have. I got to really engage in that. So. Any other questions? I want to give it another second or two. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording because